She arrived at the interview covered in mud, but what she said made the billionaire CEO fall madly in love. She showed up to the most important interview of her life, covered in mud. Everyone in the room laughed. Someone snapped a photo, and within hours, her humiliation went viral. They told her she could reschedule. They expected her to walk away, but she didn't. She stood taller, looked the billionaire CEO in the eyes, and said something he never forgot. Not an excuse, not an apology, just one quiet sentence that silenced the entire room. What happened next wasn't just a second chance. It was the beginning of a love story no one saw coming, not even him. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. The laughter started before she even reached the glass revolving door. "Is she seriously walking in like that?" one of the receptionists whispered, her smile half hidden behind her computer monitor. Isabella Carter paused just outside. She took a steady breath. The weight of dried mud pulled at the hem of her light beige blazer, now ruined. Her left heel had snapped in half. Her long dark hair, once carefully curled that morning, was shoved into a loose bun, strands clinging to her damp cheek. She looked like anything but an executive candidate for a job at Blackwood International. Still, she lifted her chin and stepped inside. The lobby was all glass and polished stone, with high ceilings and a rotating abstract sculpture in the center. Elegant, expensive, and completely silent. A hush fell the moment she entered, as if every person in the room paused mid-thought just to witness her embarrassment. It wasn't cruel, just quietly damning. Their eyes said what their lips didn't dare. She doesn't belong here. The security guard hesitated before offering her a visitor badge. "Full name, please?" he asked, scanning her outfit with poorly disguised discomfort. "Isabella Carter. I'm here for the strategic marketing lead final interview with Mr. Blackwood." He looked her up and down once more, tapped her name into the tablet with a hint of reluctance, and handed her the badge, careful not to let his fingers touch hers. She noticed, but didn't flinch. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Isabella found herself standing between two women in sleek navy suits and perfect blowouts. Their heels were sharp, their perfume expensive. They didn't speak, but both gave her a glance that said everything. Poor thing, this won't take long. And maybe they were right. Her reflection in the elevator's mirror confirmed it. She looked defeated, like she'd walked through a storm just to be rejected with a smile. She had. 20 minutes earlier, a city maintenance truck had veered too close to the curb, splashing a wave of oily rainwater and street mud across her body like a cruel punchline. There hadn't been time to go home. There hadn't even been time to cry. This was her last interview of the month, of the year. The only callback she'd gotten after 79 resumes and 4 part-time jobs that still left her short on rent. She'd almost turned back on the sidewalk, almost given up. But then she remembered the note her sister had left that morning, stuck on the fridge with a chipped magnet shaped like a red heart. "Even if the world says no, your truth is your power. Go, Bella, for me, for you." So she came, and now she was stepping onto the 39th floor, head held high, like she was still wearing velvet instead of disgrace. The receptionist at the executive wing blinked as Isabella approached. "May I help you?" "I have a 10 a.m. interview with Mr. Blackwood," she replied. The receptionist hesitated. "Are you Ms. Carter?" "I am." Another blink, another glance, a small, polite pause before she picked up the phone. Moments later, a tall, suited assistant opened the glass door to the inner offices. He looked like he belonged on a movie set. Slick hair, crisp lines, the kind of walk that said he didn't make mistakes. Except this time, he was clearly trying not to laugh. "This way," he said, his tone clipped. "The boardroom is ready." Boardroom. Isabella's stomach flipped. This wasn't just a one-on-one with a recruiter. No, This was the final round, a panel, a presentation. She hadn't even had a chance to wipe her face. As they walked through the hallway, she passed two junior associates who did nothing to hide their smirks. "Guess Halloween came early," one murmured. The other chuckled. But Isabella didn't react. She just kept walking, even as her broken heel made her limp slightly on the left side. Her blouse was clinging to her back. Her heart beat so loud she was sure it echoed down the corridor. And then the door opened. Inside the boardroom sat four people, three sharply dressed executives, and at the head of the table, a man in a navy suit whose presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Ethan Blackwood, the Ethan Blackwood, CEO, billionaire, industry golden boy, the man whose face had been on magazine covers and Forbes lists before he turned 30. His gaze was focused on his tablet until the assistant cleared his throat. "You're 10 o'clock, sir." Ethan glanced up, and then he saw her. For one long, piercing second, no one spoke. The two female executives exchanged a glance. One of them actually raised an eyebrow. Isabella took a slow breath and walked in. Standing tall at the opposite end of the conference table, a ridiculous image of determination and disaster. "I know what I look like," she said, before anyone could speak. Her voice didn't shake. "And I promise there's a good reason for it. But if you'll give me 10 minutes of your time, I'll show you that what I have to offer can't be washed off with a dry cleaner." There was silence. Then, surprisingly, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Go on," he said quietly. His voice was low, smooth, and far more curious than mocking. Isabella's heart jumped in her chest. She unclipped the small folder she'd managed to keep dry under her arm and placed it on the table. The mud-stained sleeve of her blazer stuck slightly as she pulled her arm away, but she didn't flinch. "I've built marketing campaigns with no budget, no team, and no connections. I've turned a $300 ad spend into 180% growth for a local bookstore that was going bankrupt. I don't look like your typical strategic marketing lead candidate right now. But I've worked harder than most people with perfect resumes. I'm here because I believe your company needs someone who understands what it means to start with nothing." One of the women scoffed softly. But Ethan didn't blink. In fact, something in his eyes shifted. The steel in them warmed, then warmed. A question, quiet but sharp. "Why didn't you reschedule?" Isabella looked him straight in the eye. "Because this might be my only shot, and if I walk away now, I'm not the kind of person I claim to be on paper." Another silence. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He smiled, a small, amused, curious smile that didn't reach the others at the table. And just as Isabella thought she might have a chance, the glass door opened again. A woman in red heels walked in, polished, poised, perfect. "Sorry I'm late," she said smoothly, placing a Gucci purse on the table. Naomi Lancaster, head of brand strategy, and until recently the leading name for the new marketing division, took the seat nearest Ethan without asking. "I assume you've started without me." She looked directly at Isabella and smirked. It was her, Naomi Lancaster, Ethan's ex, and now her unexpected rival inside the room. Naomi Lancaster didn't just walk in, she arrived. The kind of arrival that echoed through decades of privilege, Ivy League polish, and curated social charm. Her lipstick matched her shoes. Her hair gleamed like it had its own lighting team. Her blazer didn't have mud on it. It had a signature. She took the seat nearest Ethan without asking, like she'd sat there before. Many times. Isabella stayed standing. Ethan didn't say a word, but something in his eyes, something sharp and assessing, flicked from Naomi back to Isabella like he was watching a play with two very different leads. "I didn't realize there were joint interviews," Naomi said, resting her perfectly manicured hand on the table. Her eyes never left Isabella. "Unless she's cleaning staff?" A soft chuckle escaped from one of the other executives. Isabella's breath caught. Not out of anger, but that quiet disbelief that hits when someone crosses a line in a room full of silence. Ethan looked at Naomi. She's a candidate, and she was in the middle of her pitch. Oh? Naomi's smile tightened. Well then, by all means, continue. Isabella could feel the sting behind her eyes, but she didn't let it rise. Instead, she turned a page in her folder and walked to the whiteboard. Every step echoed in her soggy shoes. Every move was a risk. I've spent the last 2 years consulting for small businesses that couldn't afford anyone else, she began, uncapping the marker. They weren't glamorous clients, but they taught me how to listen, how to pivot fast, how to make something out of very little. That's the kind of thinking you need when the market shifts overnight. She started outlining a case study, a bookstore revival campaign, step by step. No buzzwords, just results. Her writing slanted awkwardly. The marker squeaked once, but her voice was steady. Her hands moved with purpose. Ethan watched her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to like. Then, her stomach growled, loudly, and everyone heard it. The moment hung in the air like static. Naomi smirked behind her coffee cup. The senior execs glanced down at their tablets, pretending not to notice. Isabella looked up from the board, the marker still in her hand. Apologies, she said, her tone calm. I haven't had a chance to eat since 5 a.m. A pause, then, to her own surprise, she added with a smile, Mud wasn't on the breakfast menu. Ethan barked a single laugh, not loud, but real. Even one of the executives cracked a reluctant grin. It was the smallest shift, but she felt it, like a breeze when the room's been stale too long. Naomi, visibly annoyed, crossed her legs and glanced at Ethan. Should I come back later? Or is this performance art part of the new hiring process? Ethan's voice dropped a register, cooler, firmer now. You're welcome to stay, Naomi, but you're not part of the decision panel. You asked to observe. I thought it'd be educational, she replied lightly. Always good to see what's out there. You never know who might surprise you. The moment passed like a cloud blocking the sun. Isabella finished her short presentation and returned to her seat, still standing, still muddy, still owning every inch of her ruined suit like it was made of silk. She slid the folder across the table toward Ethan. It's not printed on glossy paper, but those are real numbers, real growth, real people. Ethan didn't reach for the folder right away. He was still looking at her, with a kind of quiet intensity that made her feel suddenly seen. Thank you, Ms. Carter, he said, his voice measured. We'll be in touch. And just like that, the moment was over. She nodded once and left the room, shoes squelching slightly on the marble floor as the door clicked softly behind her. The elevator was blessedly empty this time. Isabella leaned back against the wall and exhaled. Her arms trembled. Her face was warm, flushed with adrenaline and mortification, and that strange, reckless boldness that had come out of nowhere. She had no idea what just happened, but she knew she wouldn't regret it. Downstairs, the receptionist didn't make eye contact this time. The security guard gave her a short nod as he collected the visitor badge. No smirks, no words. Outside, the sky had cleared. The mud on the sidewalk had dried into cracks. She sat on the edge of a planter and pulled off her broken heel, rubbing the sore spot on her ankle. And for the first time that day, she smiled. Not because things had gone well, they hadn't, but because somehow she'd spoken without shrinking. She glanced at her phone. No messages, no missed calls, no magic solution waiting in her inbox, but also no shame. Just as she stood up to leave, a voice called out behind her. Ms. Carter? She turned. It was him, Ethan Blackwood. Standing outside the revolving doors in his navy suit, looking every bit the billionaire CEO, and holding a paper bag and a to-go coffee cup. Isabella froze. Did I forget something? He walked toward her slowly, offering the coffee and bag. Lunch, or late breakfast, depending on your schedule. She blinked. You brought me food. You were running on empty. He gestured to the bench. I figured this would be less humiliating than passing out in the lobby. A pause. Then she laughed. Short, surprised, honest. I'm not in the habit of accepting charity. Good, he said, sitting beside her without asking. It's not charity. She glanced down at the cup. It had her name written on it, misspelled as Isabel. He noticed and smiled. I guessed. They sat in silence for a beat. She took a sip of the coffee. It was exactly how she liked it. And for the first time that day, she felt warm, truly warm. Then, just as she reached for the bag, her phone buzzed, a single notification, subject, urgent, company-wide email sent by mistake. She tapped it, and her heart stopped. The email, apparently sent from Naomi's assistant, had included sensitive comments about an unqualified muddy girl disrupting executive interviews. It had been forwarded to the entire company, and the media had already picked it up. Isabella's photo was now viral, and the world was watching. And she didn't move. Her fingers hovered over the phone screen, the coffee cup suddenly trembling in her lap. The image at the top of the email was unmistakable. Isabella, standing in that boardroom, covered in mud, pointing at the whiteboard with a marker in hand. The subject line screamed in bold, "This is who's interviewing at Blackwood now." Dozens of replies had already flooded the thread. Yikes! Is this a prank? Was there a flood we missed? Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan leaned over, reading the screen. His jaw tightened, his expression darkened, not with embarrassment, but something colder, controlled fury. "Naomi," he muttered, or her assistant. But that wording, "She wrote this." Isabella couldn't speak. Her voice had shriveled somewhere in her chest. Her hands curled around the paper bag like it might anchor her to the moment. "This is mortifying," she whispered. "No," he said sharply, standing. "This is unacceptable." But Isabella didn't move. "My picture's everywhere now. People are laughing." "At me?" He looked down at her, and there was a softness in his voice when he spoke next. "Let them. If you can handle a room like you did today, you can handle this." She looked up at him, eyes still wide. "Do you really believe that?" "I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't." A car honked in the distance. People passed by on the sidewalk, unaware that the woman on the bench, hair a mess, shoes ruined, coffee forgotten, was now the center of the Internet's latest gossip storm. She exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Okay." He tilted his head, a hint of curiosity behind his storm-gray eyes. "Okay. I'll survive this," she said. "But I'm going to need a decent sandwich first." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." Later that afternoon, Isabella sat at a tiny cafe table inside a tucked-away bistro in Midtown. The walls were lined with crooked paintings and shelves full of mismatched mugs. It smelled like basil, flour, and something that had been simmering for hours. She bit into the grilled cheese with the kind of focus people usually reserve for tax returns. Across from her, Ethan, still in his suit but now with his tie loosened, watched her like she was some kind of anomaly. "I'm trying to decide if this is the best sandwich I've ever had," she said between bites. "Or if it just tastes that way because my last meal was 3 crackers and a vitamin gummy." "I'm going to go with both," he said dryly. For a moment they just sat in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. The cafe was small enough that no one seemed to notice them, or if they did, they didn't care. Which, for Isabella, was a miracle. "I don't even know what happens next," she said after a long sip of tea. Ethan's expression grew more serious. "The PR team will respond, and the email leak will be addressed internally. I'll make sure of that." She looked at him, half joking. "Do you usually take your interview candidates to lunch and defend their honor?" He didn't smile this time. He simply said, "No, Her heart did an odd, slow flip. A soft chime from his phone interrupted the moment. He read the message, his brow furrowing. HR is starting a formal investigation. They'll want to talk to you. About what? She asked, wiping her hands on a napkin. About the leak. About Naomi. Isabella looked down at the plate between them. Do I even still have a chance at the job? There was a pause. Then Ethan said carefully, You didn't just make an impression today. You reminded me, and everyone else, what courage looks like when it isn't polished. Her throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from hope. Real hope. Meanwhile, at Blackwood HQ, Naomi Lancaster paced her office, the glass windows casting reflections like knives. Her assistant stood near the desk, clearly pale. You sent it to everyone? Naomi hissed. I thought I was just forwarding it to you. I used your draft. You were supposed to clean it up. Make it anonymous. It auto-filled the contact group. I swear I didn't mean to. Naomi slammed her palm against the desk. Ethan's going to use this against me. Her assistant swallowed hard. What if we say it was hacked? A phishing attack? Naomi paused. No, that makes me look even more incompetent. She paced again. Faster now. We do damage control. We spin it. We say we were concerned about security protocols being broken, that she showed up without clearance, no ID, mud on her. She was a disruption. Her assistant opened her mouth to respond, but Naomi's phone buzzed. One new message from Ethan Blackwood, subject, Office meeting, urgent time, 6 p.m. Location, 39th floor, executive boardroom. She read it and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Fear. Back at the cafe, Isabella wiped her hands and stood, brushing crumbs from her lap. Her clothes were still stained, her hair still in that unruly bun, but her eyes, they were steady now. Thank you, she said, meeting Ethan's gaze. He stood too, slower. For the sandwich? For seeing me. A beat passed. Then she added, I should go before your assistant snaps a photo of us and leaks it to the press. That already happened, he said, not missing a beat. She blinked. What? He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. A grainy shot of the two of them at the table. A social media post already racking up comments. Who's the muddy mystery woman? CEO Ethan Blackwood spotted having lunch with the viral Mud Girl. Scandal or sympathy? Isabella groaned and put her face in her hands. This is not happening. Ethan laughed, this time freely. Then he said, You're trending again. By the time Isabella got home that evening, the door creaked like it was embarrassed for her. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Her sister Lily was probably still at her late shift at the community clinic. The same clinic that Isabella had helped redesign the branding for pro bono. Of course, there hadn't been much to gain from it, except maybe her own sense of worth. She set her keys on the counter, toed off her ruined shoes, and stared at herself in the mirror on the back of the front door. The mud had dried into streaks. Her eyes were tired, her bun was collapsing, but something about her reflection had changed. She didn't look like someone who was giving up anymore. Just as she opened the fridge, mostly empty save for a carton of almond milk and half a lemon, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, new message. We'd like to schedule a statement and internal interview with you regarding today's events. HR will reach out officially in the morning. EB. She stared at the initials for a long moment. It was personal and professional, somehow both. She typed back, Understood. I'll be ready. Then paused and added, P.S. The sandwich helped, even if I'm internet famous for the wrong reasons. A beat later, the 3 dots appeared, typing. Fame's funny. It reveals who's real and who's just loud. She stared at the message for a while and smiled. The next morning, the Blackwood offices were already humming with tension. PR teams whispered in glass-walled conference rooms. Assistants pretended not to read the headlines. Naomi's name was trending, and not in the way she was used to. A senior manager passed Ethan in the hallway, murmuring, HR's getting pressure from the board. Some of them want Naomi's head. Some are worried about backlash. Let them worry, Ethan replied coolly. I'll handle it. Inside his private office, all steel, glass and an absurd view of the skyline, he stared out at the city as his assistant brought in the morning briefing. Still no apology from Naomi? He asked. None. Interesting. He turned slowly, buttoning his jacket. Get legal and HR on the call, and reach out to Isabella Carter. I want her to know we're taking this seriously. The assistant hesitated. Should I also cancel your dinner with the Langston investors? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? They're asking questions about the girl in the mud. He paused, then smiled faintly. Tell them she's exactly the kind of person this company needs. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Isabella sat across from her sister Lily at a tiny kitchen table with a chipped floral pattern. Lily, still in her scrubs and with her hair in a high, messy bun, was scrolling through her phone with wide eyes. You're on BuzzScene, Daily Chatter, and Business Bells? Lily blinked. How did you end up on a blog about billionaires and bridal drama? I guess mud and mayhem qualify as clickbait, Lily smirked. You sure you didn't spill a little charm on that CEO? Isabella rolled her eyes. It wasn't like that. Uh-huh. It wasn't. Her sister set the phone down. But is it going to be? Because if I Google his net worth one more time, I might pass out. Isabella laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. He's something. But it's complicated. He's my potential employer. Or was. Lily's voice softened. I've seen the way you light up when you talk about yesterday. It's not just about the job. Isabella didn't respond, but her silence said everything. Later that day, back at Blackwood HQ, the internal meeting had been called. A round table of HR reps, legal advisors, and Ethan Blackwood himself, sitting at the head of the room, sleeves rolled up, no tie, expression unreadable. Isabella arrived precisely on time, this time wearing a simple navy dress, clean flats, and her hair in a neat low bun. She looked composed, clear-eyed, and completely different from the woman who'd once stood covered in mud. But somehow she looked even more powerful now. The HR lead began. Ms. Carter, we want to formally apologize for the breach of internal professionalism, as well as the impact the leaked email may have had on your reputation. Isabella nodded, but didn't speak. The lead continued. We've identified the sender and... Ethan raised a hand, stopping her. Let's not play soft. Naomi Lancaster is responsible. Whether she sent it or approved it, it was done with the intention to humiliate. The room went still. Furthermore, he added, Isabella Carter will remain a candidate for the strategic marketing lead role. And if the board disagrees, they can bring it to me directly. Murmurs. A legal rep scribbled notes. Isabella blinked. You're keeping me in the process? You earned it, despite the mess. Or maybe because of it. She stared at him, then glanced at the others in the room. I want to make something clear, she said slowly. I'm not here to cause drama. I didn't ask for this attention, but I will stand up for myself. And if your company values only polished perfection, then I'm the wrong fit. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that half-smile returning. But if you value resilience and heart, and people who show up anyway, even covered in mud, then maybe I belong here after all. No one spoke. Then Ethan said simply, You do. That evening. Back in her apartment, Isabella found something unexpected in her mailbox. A small envelope, no return address. Inside it, a photograph. A printed glossy still frame from the viral boardroom photo, but edited. The mud was faded, the lighting softened. The caption scrawled on the back in black ink. Sometimes the moment you're most humiliated is the moment you're most brave. No signature. But she didn't need one. She recognized the handwriting. It was his. It had been a long time since Isabella cried, since Not the quiet, tired kind of crying, the kind that just trickles down your cheek and goes unnoticed, but the real kind, the kind that catches you off guard in the middle of something simple, like washing a coffee mug or folding a towel. That night it happened over a shoebox. She'd been looking for a charger cable. The old ones she and Lily never threw out were stuffed in the back of her closet. She pulled out the box, sat cross-legged on the floor, and opened the lid, expecting nothing but dust and wires. Instead, she found the past, a stack of envelopes, ribbon-tied postcards, faded programs from school plays and local events. And near the bottom, a sealed letter. To Ethan Blackwood, she gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand going to her chest. She'd written it 3 years ago. A letter meant to accompany her first ever job application to Blackwood International, back when she was a fresh graduate, bright-eyed, full of ideas and desperation, and absolutely no connections. She had written the letter by hand, with care, but she'd chickened out before sending it. Isabella opened it now with trembling fingers. "Dear Mr. Blackwood, you don't know me. You probably never will. But I'm applying to your company because I believe that brands can change people's lives. And you've built a brand that did that for me. When my mom passed and we almost lost our home, your foundation's literacy campaign helped save the community library. I spent entire afternoons there because we had no heat at home. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me a future. That's why I want to work for you. I don't come from money or legacy or anything shiny, but I work hard and I learn fast. And if you ever give me the chance, I promise I'll make it count. Yours, Isabella Carter." She stared at the words. Tears blurred the ink. She'd never sent it. She'd been too afraid it would sound emotional, unprofessional, small. Now she realized it was none of those things. It was honest. It was her, and Ethan needed to read it. Meanwhile, back at the office, Ethan stood by the window, the glowing skyline spread out before him, arms crossed. He hadn't stopped thinking about her. Not since the boardroom, not since the cafe, not since the way she looked at him with defiance. Yes, but also a kind of raw clarity that shook him. He'd seen ambition before, plenty of it. What he hadn't seen in years was conviction without ego, heart without agenda. And that letter he'd sent her, it was impulsive. He never did things like that, never crossed professional boundaries. But something about her, something in her, refused to stay compartmentalized. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and drafted a message. "If you're free tomorrow, I'd like to continue our conversation. Not an interview, just coffee. Real coffee this time." He stared at the screen, then hit send. The next day, in a quiet corner cafe, it felt like the kind of place no one really noticed. All reclaimed wood and oversized mugs. The barista greeted Ethan by name, but with the same casual ease as any other customer. Isabella arrived 5 minutes early. She wore jeans and a deep green sweater, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. The only makeup was a soft trace of lipstick. Ethan stood when she walked in, and for a moment, he simply looked at her. No mud, no stress, just her. "Hi," she said. He gestured to the window booth, already set with 2 cappuccinos and a slice of lemon cake. "I remembered you mentioned breakfast was 3 crackers and a vitamin gummy." She grinned. "Well, that's generous compared to some days." They sat. For a few moments it was quiet, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that had room to breathe. "I brought something," she said, pulling the folded letter from her bag. He raised an eyebrow. "A cease and desist?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Worse. Something I never meant to send." She slid it across the table. He read it without interrupting. As he did, his expression changed. Slowly, subtly. His shoulders dropped, his jaw relaxed. When he finished, he looked up, and there was something entirely new in his eyes. "I had no idea," he said softly. "I never thought it mattered," she replied. "But then, I realized I want you to see all of me. Not just the polished version. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, then met her gaze. I saw you the moment you walked in that boardroom, he said, and I haven't stopped seeing you since. She swallowed. You know this is risky. Us. If this becomes something, he nodded. Which is why, if it does, we do it right, transparent, public, no secrets. I won't let it jeopardize your chance. She smiled gently. You really are a romantic buried under all that, Armani. Don't ruin my reputation, he teased. She reached for her coffee, raising her cup. 2 second chances. Even the muddy ones. He clinked his cup against hers, especially the muddy ones. Somewhere outside, in a parked car, a camera shutter clicked softly. A photographer with a press badge lowered his lens, smirking. Gotcha, he whispered. He tapped a message on his phone. Got the coffee date. Blackwood's not so untouchable anymore. Photo incoming. And just like that, what was supposed to be private was about to go very, very public. By mid-morning, her face was everywhere, again. But this time, it wasn't mud. It was lemon cake and coffee. And the impossible-to-misinterpret moment caught mid-laugh. Mid-glance, Isabella Carter and Ethan Blackwood sitting side by side in a cozy window booth, heads tilted close, her hand just barely brushing the sleeve of his suit. The photo had a caption before she even saw it. Billionaire CEO's viral mud girl. Now, his mystery date. From disaster to romance? Ethan Blackwood and Isabella Carter spark rumors after being spotted at an off-grid cafe less than 24 hours after the boardroom drama. And just like that, the interview wasn't what people were talking about anymore. It was them. At Blackwood International, inside the boardroom on the 39th floor, Naomi Lancaster slid the printout across the polished table toward the board. Do you want this circulating, really? She said coolly. The executives glanced at the photo. Some smiled faintly, others looked mildly uncomfortable. She's a candidate, not a public figure. He's the CEO. It's a headline waiting to backfire. She's also the victim of your leaked email, Ethan replied sharply. Walking in without knocking, Naomi barely blinked. And now she's what? Your lunch date? Ethan ignored the jab. She was humiliated. I offered her coffee. That's not misconduct. It's decency. An older board member leaned forward, voice slow. Ethan, we've backed you through acquisitions, expansions, even personal press. But if there's even a shadow of impropriety, there's not. Then be proactive, the man continued. Make a statement. Clarify the situation before the media turns it into a scandal. Ethan exhaled through his nose. He didn't like being cornered, even by the truth. Fine, he said. I'll address it. Today. Late that morning, in Isabella's apartment, the knock at her door wasn't gentle. Isabella wiped her hands on a dish towel, confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, a uniformed courier handed her a crisp navy envelope, embossed, sealed. Blackwood International, confidential. She blinked. What is this? Hand delivery. I was told not to leave until you read it. Isabella opened it cautiously. Inside, a formal statement draft clearly written by a PR team, sanitized, safe, impersonal. In response to recent photos, Blackwood International would like to clarify that Ms. Carter is not employed by the company, and there exists no conflict of interest regarding her candidacy or interview. She read the last line twice. There exists no conflict. Just words, cold words. It wasn't signed by Ethan, but it might as well have been. What Isabella didn't know was that Ethan had already rejected the draft. If there was going to be a statement, it would be his statement. She stood there in the doorway, still barefoot, heart slowly sinking. So this was how it would be. Quiet distancing, respectful erasure. Later that afternoon, in the company atrium, Ethan stepped up to the podium, a mic pinned to his lapel. The internal broadcast streamed across all Blackwood offices worldwide. not because of a scandal, at least not yet, but because leadership was watching. The board was watching. She was watching. He spoke clearly, calmly. I've always believed leadership means showing up when it's hard, owning your mistakes, and protecting people when they don't have power in the room. His voice didn't waver. What happened in that boardroom was a failure, not of professionalism, but of culture. Ms. Carter came to us as a candidate. She was mocked. Her photo was leaked. And still she delivered one of the most compelling pitches I've seen in years. Somewhere, Naomi was stiffening in her seat. I met with Ms. Carter afterward, not as her superior, not as a CEO, but as a person who respects courage, and yes, I bought her coffee. A few chuckles echoed through the crowd, but I didn't cross a line. I made sure of that, and if someday this company is lucky enough to have her on our team, it won't be because of me. It will be because she earned it in mud-soaked heels, with a voice that didn't shake. He looked up at the camera, and that's the kind of strength I want beside me, not behind me. That night, back in her apartment, she didn't cry, but she felt something unhook inside her, like the breath she'd been holding for days finally left her chest. She rewound the broadcast, listening again. With a voice that didn't shake, she stared at the folded letter on her coffee table, the one he still carried, the one she almost didn't send. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Blackwood. If I'm not fired by morning, would you consider letting me take you to dinner? Somewhere with actual chairs? She laughed softly, then typed back. Only if it's somewhere I can wear clean shoes. P.S. I have a counteroffer. You bring the wine. I'll cook. Meanwhile, in Naomi's office, a knock sounded at the door. She turned, expecting her assistant. Instead, it was legal. 2 suits. No smiles. We need a word, she narrowed her eyes. About what? The email, HR's final decision. I've already spoken to... There's more, the older one said, handing her a folder. Apparently, there's a pattern. Naomi's fingers froze on the file as she read the line in bold, 30-day suspension without bonus eligibility. A cold, quiet panic settled over her shoulders. This wasn't over. Not even close. Back in Isabella's kitchen, the pasta sauce simmered. She lit a small candle on the table, not because it was romantic, but because it made things feel less temporary. Then she opened the drawer and took out an old faded object. The red heart-shaped magnet from her mom's fridge, the one that had held the letter. She placed it gently on the counter. It meant home. It meant family. It meant she wasn't the girl from the boardroom anymore. And tomorrow, she was going to be something even braver. He brought wine, of course he did. Wine. Of a soft Merlot with a label she couldn't pronounce and a ribbon around the neck. Not for show, just thoughtfulness. Something about that tiny detail made Isabella nervous in a way she hadn't been all week. This feels very high stakes, she teased, opening the door. Ethan stood there in jeans, honest-to-God jeans, and a dark sweater, looking slightly unsure of himself. It was the first time he hadn't looked like he owned the building he was standing in. High stakes? He echoed. You brought a ribbon. He looked down at the bottle. It was either this or flowers, and I didn't know if flowers were presumptuous. She stepped aside to let him in. Flowers would have been safer. Wine makes it feel like a date. He glanced at her carefully. And is it? She swallowed, then smiled. I haven't decided yet. The apartment smelled like rosemary, garlic, and just a little burnt toast. The table had 2 place settings and 1 small candle flickering in a chipped votive holder shaped like a sunflower. Ethan looked around as he poured the wine. This feels, more real than any restaurant I've been to in years. Isabella lifted a brow. That sounds like a compliment and a warning. It's a compliment, he said. Then, after a pause, added, and maybe a confession. She sat, handing him a bowl of pasta. Bowl. Confess away. He took a sip of wine first, maybe to stall. Then, quietly, I haven't done this in a long time. Dinner? He shook his head. Connection. The room was quiet for a beat, and then, as if sensing she wouldn't judge him, he kept going. My parents were married, publicly, never privately. My father was legacy. My mother was press control. I was raised to run companies, not relationships. Isabella didn't interrupt. He gave a faint smile. I've had more board meetings than birthdays, and more headlines than honesty. She leaned her chin on her hand. You're a romantic, hiding behind strategy. He met her eyes. You're not what I expected. Because of the mud? No, he said softly. Because I thought I had the world figured out. Then you walked in, dripping on the carpet, and told me the truth, without apology. Her breath caught, and for a long moment there were no witty lines, no broken shoes, no headlines. Just two people at a table, seeing each other without the noise. After dinner, she made tea. The city buzzed softly through the open window, a distant hum of taxis and late-night dog walkers and lives unfolding without them. He leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. You keep the magnet, he said, nodding toward the red heart holding a faded receipt on the fridge. She looked over, smiled. My mom's. Was she like you? She tilted her head. She was louder, but yes, she fought hard for things most people never noticed. She'd be proud. That made her blink fast. Careful, she said. You're getting poetic again. He chuckled, then pushed off the counter. Can I show you something? He asked. She nodded. He pulled out his phone, opened a folder, and held it out to her. Inside were dozens of photos of small community projects, libraries, schools, a mobile book truck in a rural town she recognized instantly. This is what we don't put in press releases, he said. Our foundation work. Your letter reminded me why we started it. Isabella stared at the photos, and suddenly she was 7 again, sitting cross-legged in a corner of the library while her mom looked for jobs on the public computer. That library had been saved because of his company. I was just one of those kids, she whispered. He stepped closer. No, you were always more. And that's when the silence changed. Not heavy, not rushed, just full. Full of everything they hadn't said yet, but didn't need to. He didn't kiss her, not that night. Instead, when he stood to leave, he held her gaze for a long moment and said, Let's not rush this. I don't want to ruin it by pretending we're something we're not ready to be. She nodded, grateful and a little stunned by the respect in his restraint. Before he left, she reached into the drawer, took out the red heart magnet, and handed it to him. Keep it, she said, until I decide if this is a date or not. He looked at it like it was fragile. I'll guard it with my life. Meanwhile, Naomi sat at her desk staring at an empty inbox. No allies, no apologies, no more headlines. For the first time in her life, her name wasn't leading the conversation. Someone else's was. And that someone was doing it with mud on her heels and a heart that refused to bend. Naomi reached for her phone and began to type. The HR lead slid a single page across the table. We'd like to formally extend an offer for strategic marketing lead. Isabella exhaled, relief flooding her chest. I accept. Voilà. The first day didn't feel real until the elevator doors opened on the 39th floor. Isabella stood alone inside, clutching her new ID badge, strategic marketing lead, and a slim leather tote she borrowed from Lily. The light above her flickered for a second, a small, almost comic reminder that she still wasn't the polished executive the building expected. But when she stepped out, everything else was different. The stares weren't mocking this time. They were curious, some admiring, some cautious, a few clearly calculating. She offered polite nods and soft smiles, keeping her shoulders back the way her mother taught her, as if she belonged in every room she entered, even if no one else thought so yet. A junior associate walked past her, then turned back. You're the mud girl, she whispered, eyes wide. Sorry, I mean the boardroom one. You're her. Isabella smiled gently. I prefer strategic marketing lead, if it's all the same. The woman flushed. Right, of course, sorry. But there was no venom, just awe, and maybe a little hope. Later that morning, in her new office, the space felt modest. A glass partition, a desk with clean lines, and a window that overlooked the courtyard below. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. And after years of freelance jobs from her kitchen table, it felt like a palace. There was a knock. Special delivery, came a familiar voice. She turned at her son and smiled. Ethan stood in the doorway holding a small potted plant, bright green, alive, unapologetically cheerful. Is this our HR-approved version of flowers? She asked. Carefully vetted, he said. And waterable. She took it gently. Thank you. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets. No tie again. Just the relaxed version of himself she was starting to recognize, the one who looked less like a headline and more like a man. I won't linger, he said, but I wanted to say congratulations. You earned this, she tilted her head. You say that like someone tried to convince you otherwise. His eyes twinkled, just slightly. There were conversations, but nothing that held up against, well, you. Then, more seriously, we're building something here. I want your voice in the room. Just my voice? She asked. Lifting a brow, he chuckled. Let's start there. That night at home, Lily was already sprawled on the couch in her scrubs, eating peanut butter straight from the jar with a celery stick. You survived, she called out, as Isabella kicked off her shoes. Barely. I think I drank my weight in lukewarm coffee and got asked 10 times if I was that girl from the photo. And how's the billionaire boyfriend? Isabella threw a pillow at her. He's not my boyfriend. Yet? We're figuring it out. Slowly. Lily took another bite. Good. He needs to earn you. All of you. That made Isabella pause. She walked over and sat beside her sister. Do you think I'm changing? Lily looked at her. You? No? You're still folding your clean laundry and not putting it away for 3 days. You're still Googling how to boil the perfect egg. Fair. But, Lily added, softening, you're stronger. And maybe starting to believe that people like you can be at the top, without losing who you are. Isabella leaned her head on Lily's shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. On her second day back at Blackwood, Isabella arrived early. The office was still quiet, morning light slanting in through the windows. She carried a small tray of pastries and placed them gently on the shared table in the strategy wing. By 9:00 a.m., half the team had drifted in and paused, surprised. Is this for us? One analyst asked. I thought we could use a sweet start, Isabella said simply. There was a moment, brief but significant, where the tension broke. A thank you here, a laugh there. A few colleagues lingered to introduce themselves. Some even asked about her past campaigns. And just like that, she wasn't the mud girl. She was part of the team. Late that afternoon, in the executive boardroom, Naomi was already seated when Isabella arrived for the strategy presentation. Her red heels were back. So was her impeccable lipstick. But the energy had shifted. She looked sharp, but quieter. As Isabella walked past her to take a seat, Naomi leaned in slightly. Still full of surprises, she murmured. Isabella smiled calmly. Just getting started. Naomi looked at her for a long moment, then, with a tight smile, turned away. The meeting began. That evening, in Ethan's office, the skyline was bathed in gold. Ethan stood by the window, sipping black tea instead of bourbon, a quiet nod to the fact that the day had required focus, not escape. Isabella entered with a folder tucked under her arm. You asked for ideas on the regional rollout. He took the folder and looked at her. You really never stop, do you? I've stopped plenty of times, she said. It just never got me very far. A beat passed. Then slowly she reached into her bag and handed him something. The red heart magnet. You remembered, he said quietly. Actually, she said, I forgot it this morning. I just realized I don't want it on my fridge anymore. He looked puzzled. Why not? Because, she said, meeting his eyes, my life isn't just about surviving in that apartment anymore. I don't need a reminder of what I almost lost. I need space for what's next. His gaze softened. Then let me help you build that space. And for the first time, no press, no audience, no damage control, he reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Isabella stood in front of the whiteboard, the marker hovering just above the surface. Around her sat a dozen senior team members, each with a notepad or laptop, waiting for her next move. It wasn't just a presentation, it was a test. A room full of quiet judgment, eyes sharp, polite smiles masking years of power. And she was leading it. 10 days ago, she was a story, a headline. The Mud Girls. Now, she was something else. And she intended to prove it. She drew a short line across the board and turned to face them. We don't need more billboards, she said calmly. We need roots, human stories. We need to show up in places people don't expect a billion-dollar brand to care about, because that's where trust is built. She clicked the remote in her hand. Advancing the slide on the screen behind her, a grainy photo popped up, a small library in Georgia, its windows taped up, its sign barely hanging on. Places like this still exist, she said, and they're full of families who don't know what a luxury customer experience is, but they know what it means when someone shows up to help. A quiet murmur moved across the table. She let it settle, then continued. I'm proposing we shift 15% of our regional ad budget toward real community investment. Not just PR stunts, lasting things, literacy programs, after-school centers, job training partnerships, local internships. A long silence followed, then a voice. Then, Ole Spabori. You're suggesting we divert ad budget to public schools? One of the senior executives asked, clearly unsure whether to laugh or lean in. I'm suggesting we stop talking at people, Isabella replied evenly, and start standing beside them. She took a breath and added, more softly, because I was one of them. And when a company like this shows up in your world, it changes everything. The room quieted. And then something unexpected happened. One of the older women at the table, someone who hadn't spoken once during the meeting, nodded. I agree with her, she said. It's bold, but it's the kind of bold that builds legacy. Not just quarterly returns. Heads turned. Another voice added, it could even be the story about the campaign, not just part of it. A slow ripple of nods moved through the room, and just like that, Isabella knew. She had the room. Later that evening in Ethan's office, she found him standing by the tall window. As he often did, arms crossed, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. The city glittered behind him, but his gaze was fixed somewhere else. You disappeared after the meeting, she said gently. He didn't turn around right away. Habit. You usually vanish after people compliment your company's future? That got a slight smile. He turned. I've built a career on holding it all together, he said, always being the one with the answers. But lately, he exhaled. Lately, I'm not sure if I'm managing an empire or if it's managing me. She stepped closer, tilting her head. That's the most human thing I've heard all day. Ethan leaned back against the window frame. I grew up in boardrooms. My father didn't do second chances or soft landings. I watched him treat people like currency, and I swore I'd be different. He looked away again. But sometimes I feel like I'm turning into him anyway, more image than substance. You're not, Isabella said softly. You don't know that. I know it because you stood up for me. Publicly, personally, because you risked your own reputation to protect mine. People like your father don't do that. He didn't speak for a while. Then, finally, you asked me what I'm afraid of losing. She nodded. His voice dropped. This, you. Isabella's breath caught. There was no dramatics in his voice. No sweeping declaration. Just the raw truth of a man who hadn't admitted that to anyone. Maybe ever. And instead of answering with words, she simply reached out and took his hand. At the same time, in Naomi's office, the overhead light flickered faintly, casting sharp shadows across her spotless desk. Naomi sat with her laptop open and a glass of untouched sparkling water beside it. Her inbox was empty. Her calendar had more white space than it had in years. She stared at a draft email, titled, Subject, Resignation Offer, to Ethan Blackwood. Her cursor blinked at the end of the message. She hadn't clicked send. Not yet. A part of her, the polished, calculating part, knew stepping down gracefully could preserve her image, allow her to reappear elsewhere with a narrative of new horizons. But another part of her, the part she didn't show anyone, felt something unfamiliar. Defeat? No, not quite. It was being outmaneuvered by a girl who hadn't played the game but somehow won anyway. Naomi picked up her phone and stared at it. Then she began to type. That night, back in Isabella's apartment, she opened the drawer by the fridge and reached instinctively for the red heart magnet. But it wasn't there anymore. The space looked empty without it. Bare. Like something had ended. So she did something new. She took a fresh slip of paper and pinned it to the fridge. It was blank. No words, no quote, no memory, just space for what was coming next. Later that night, a text lit up Isabella's phone. Ethan, are you still awake? Isabella, technically, but if I blink too long, I might fall asleep with my eyes open. Ethan, come see something. 15 minutes later, she was standing beside him on a rooftop, not one of his skyscrapers, but an older building in Midtown, the original Blackwood headquarters, now quietly leased to startups and nonprofits. Across the street, floodlights glowed around a fenced construction site. Steel beams reached toward the sky. Concrete walls half-framed a future building. Machinery sat idle for the night. What is this? She asked, arms folded against the chill. The next Blackwood Foundation project, Ethan said. Community center, public library, job lab. We broke ground last week. Her eyes widened. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at her, voice soft. Because I wanted you to see it when it mattered, and now it does. She stepped closer to the edge, heart thudding in her chest. I pitched almost this exact thing yesterday, I know, he said. We had it in motion, but you gave it heart. She turned to him, and there was something shining in her eyes. Not tears, but belief. Not just in the project, in him, and in herself. 2 weeks later, Isabella didn't expect to see her name in a subject line again. Not after the media cooled. Not after the whispers in the office softened into respect. But there it was, bold, unread, waiting in her inbox. Subject, Let's Talk Isabella. From Devon and Hayes. Her eyebrows lifted. Devon and Hayes was one of the largest consulting firms in the country, sleek, elite, and completely out of reach 6 months ago. She had once sent them a resume. It had gone unanswered. She clicked. We've been following your journey at Blackwood with great interest. Your recent presentation showed not only creative insight, but rare conviction. We'd like to talk about a leadership opportunity on our strategic storytelling team, senior manager, principal level, with a fast track to VP. A pause. She read it again. VP level? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her breath caught in her throat. It felt like the kind of email you screenshot just to prove it happened. Only this time, it was real. And it came with power, title, pay, prestige, and possibly distance. Later that day, inside the Blackwood elevator, Isabella slipped in just as the doors were closing, only to find Naomi already there. The silence was instant, professional, polite, but not quite empty. Naomi glanced at her, then down at her phone, then back. I heard you got an offer, Isabella blinked. Already? Naomi gave a tiny shrug. People talk, especially when they're afraid someone's going to rise faster than they did. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't sound bitter either. You planning to take it? Naomi asked. I haven't decided. Of course you haven't, Naomi said, as if she expected no less. You're not someone who runs toward shiny things. Isabella turned to her, genuinely surprised. You don't think it's a good move? Naomi hesitated. Then, I think it depends on whether you're chasing approval or building something real. Isabella studied her. And what are you building? Naomi finally looked her in the eye. A different kind of legacy. The elevator chimed. Naomi stepped out first, heels clicking against the marble. Just before turning the corner, she looked back. I left something on your desk. Read it before you make any decisions. And then she was gone. Later that morning, on Isabella's desk, a slim envelope was waiting. No logo, no handwriting. Inside, a single-page printout. It was a press release, but not just any. Blackwood Foundation to launch Community Leadership Grant, inspired by recent internal voices. And beneath that, a highlighted line. This initiative is dedicated to the belief that leadership isn't about how loud your voice is, but how deeply it listens, a value modeled by recent team contributions we're proud to now support. No names, no fanfare. But she knew. Naomi had signed off on this, had made sure it went through, not for credit, not for revenge, maybe for something that looked suspiciously like redemption. That night in Ethan's office, she didn't knock. He looked up from his desk, the skyline behind him dimming into soft dusk. You heard? She asked. About Devon and Hayes? She nodded. He set down his pen. They're not fools. No, she said, they're not. He stood slowly, coming around the desk to face her. I'm not going to talk you out of it, he said. I know. I want you to have every opportunity. I know that too. The quiet between them stretched. Then she said gently, but you're afraid I'll take it. He didn't answer, which was, in itself, an answer. I've worked so hard just to be in the room, she whispered. Now someone's offering me the table, and I don't know if I want it or if I just don't want to be asked twice. He stepped closer, voice low. What do you want? She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in her life, there wasn't just one answer. I want the life I almost gave up on, she said. The one with meaning, with roots, with someone who sees all of me and stays anyway. He didn't move, but she saw something shift in his eyes. Then she added, and I want to be somewhere my voice mattered, not just my resume. He nodded slowly. Then stay, he said, not a plea, not a command, just truth. Stay? Let's build it. The next morning at her small table, Isabella sat with the Devon and Hayes email still open. She drafted her reply carefully. Thank you for your offer. I'm deeply honored, but I've chosen to stay where I can not only grow, but belong. She hit send, then closed the laptop. And smiled, not because the choice was easy, but because it was hers. A few floors below, in Naomi's office, she read the internal memo confirming Isabella's decision, and she smiled too, but not with smugness, with something like relief. Maybe, just maybe, she'd helped someone make the kind of choice she hadn't known how to make years ago. And that mattered, more than she expected. By midday in Ethan's office, a small package waited on his desk. He opened it, confused, until he saw the contents, a notepad, a pen, and the red heart magnet. Taped to a card that read, "Some stories don't need to be pinned to the fridge anymore. They're already part of the walls." Geese. He stared at it, then closed the office door, and smiled. Not the kind he gave at press conferences, not the one he wore in boardrooms, the other one, the real one, the one that only she had ever seen. 6 months later, the mud was still part of the story. It came up in interviews, over coffee with curious interns, in passing mentions at conferences. There was always someone who said, "Wait, you're the one from the photo, right?" And Isabella would nod with a smile, not embarrassed, not bitter, just calm. "I am," she'd say, "and I still have the suit. Haven't dry cleaned it. It's sort of sacred now." They'd laugh, but not mockingly. Because the story wasn't about the mud anymore, it was about what came after. It was smaller than she remembered. Funny how childhood makes everything feel so much larger. The staircases, the shelves, the people. But the building on Maple Street still stood with its red bricks and that same cracked sidewalk she used to hop over as a girl. Only now, it had a new sign. The Eleanor Carter Learning Center, in honor of those who teach us what truly matters. Isabella stood at the front entrance, surrounded by folding chairs, chalkboard signs, a table of lemonade, and a line of children pressing their noses against the glass doors. The moment felt surreal. Like time had bent gently, looping back to show her how far she'd come. She glanced at the man beside her, tall, calm, his sleeves rolled up, a hand on her back. Ethan had driven in from the city early that morning just to stand beside her. He'd refused to speak at the ceremony, saying, "This isn't my story." "It's yours." The mayor cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said, handing her the ceremonial scissors, "would you do the honors?" Her fingers trembled, but only a little. She looked at the ribbon, red, glossy, fluttering slightly in the breeze, and then at the crowd. "This place," she said softly, "saved me once, not with miracles, but with quiet, with stories, with somewhere to go when life felt like it was falling apart." She paused, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "And I hope it does that for someone else now." The scissors snipped through the ribbon, and just like that, the doors opened, and the children rushed inside. Inside the library, the scent of fresh paint clung to the air, mixed with new carpet and lemon-scented cleaner. Some shelves were still half empty, but they stood proud. The reading nooks had new cushions. The study tables bore tiny, colored nameplates donated by families in the community. At the back of the main room was a framed photo of a little girl sitting cross-legged with a tattered book in her lap. Her sneakers untied, her hair slightly wild. She couldn't have been more than 7. It was Isabella. Underneath, a brass plaque read, "This is where her story began." Not with money, not with perfection, but with stories, silence, and hope. She reached out, touched the frame, just briefly. "I remember that sweater," she whispered. "It had a hole under the arm, but I wore it anyway because it was soft." Ethan stood beside her now, quieter than usual. "I would have noticed you," he said. She smiled. "No, you wouldn't." "Maybe not then," he replied, "but I would have remembered you now." Their hands brushed, and for once she didn't look away. Volunteers had cleared out. The children had gone home, clutching bookmarks and donated chapter books. The sun had slipped below the tree line, leaving behind a breeze that smelled like fresh bread and sawdust. Someone had strung warm yellow bulbs between 2 wooden posts. Isabella and Ethan sat side by side on a bench, lemon cake between them, the sky open above. "I can't believe the foundation offered me a board seat," she said, biting into the cake. Ethan gave her a look. "You didn't tell me that part." "I wanted to see your reaction." He raised an eyebrow. "Well?" "I said no." He blinked. "You what?" "I said—" "Not yet," she corrected. "I want to build something first. Earn it, not just be the girl with the headline and the speech." Ethan looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "That's why I trust you." She leaned her shoulder into his. "You're not so bad yourself, Blackwood." It came weeks later, a plain envelope. No return address, just her name, written in clean, stylish cursive. Inside was a handwritten note. "You were never the rival. I was fighting the younger version of myself, the one I buried to survive. Don't bury yours." Isabella sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. She didn't need more than that. She didn't need a final confrontation, just understanding and the soft end of a sharp chapter. Back home. The fridge no longer held grocery lists or reminders. It had been empty for weeks, as if waiting. She opened the drawer and pulled out the letter, the original one she never sent, the one addressed to Ethan, the one that started it all, quietly, before either of them knew. She smoothed it, pinned it to the fridge with a red heart magnet, then added something new, a handwritten note above it. Sometimes the life you were waiting for is the one you were already living. You just needed to stop apologizing for it. Later that night, in bed side by side, they lay close but not tangled, still their own people, still learning how to be with someone without losing themselves. Ethan turned his head, studying her in the glow of the bedside lamp. "You ever think about how all this started?" "You mean me looking like I'd wrestled a rainstorm?" "I mean the way you walked in. Like you had nothing left to lose." She smiled gently. "I didn't. And now?" She turned her face toward his. "Now, I have something to protect, something to build, and someone to lose." His voice dropped. "You won't." She reached for his hand under the covers, found it, held it. No ring yet, no promises they weren't ready for. But this? This was something real. Sometimes love doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in quiet recognition. In the moment someone listens, truly listens, and doesn't flinch. In the day you stand in the mud, shaking, and speak anyway. In the decision to stay, not because you have to, but because finally you want to. Because love, true love, doesn't rescue you. It stands beside you while you rescue yourself. Would you have made the same choice she did? Would you stay and build, or leave and rise faster? Let me know what you would have done. And if this story touched you, you know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you, even after they end. And rate this story from Leo to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know how it made you feel. You matter. Your voice matters. And your presence here means more than you know. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.